Welcome into another Saints Insider podcast. Today is Wednesday, March the 6th. I'm Zach Ewing, your host, along with two fine journalists from the Times-Picayune, NOLA.com, our beat writers for the Saints, Matthew Paris over here, and Luke Johnson, who we have to shout him out on the show, APSE top 10 beat writers around the country. Luke Johnson, the man.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Not quite the myth yet, or the legend, but
Not quite. Got a long way to go.
Yeah,
got a long way to go. But I can maybe start crafting, workshopping a little bit of a myth behind myself.
an aura.
Yeah. I'll make up some stories about my time in the Marines, and
I think we should
maybe everybody would believe it.
we should get Jeff Duncan to help make your legend.
Yeah, he can ghostwrite my book just like he did with Steve Gleason.
No, but seriously, top 10 in the country for A division. So we're talking everything from New York Times to Washington Post to LA Times to Sports Illustrated to ESPN. All of these people are involved in that, and Luke, one of the top 10. So congratulations. And in the meantime, follow Saints Insider on YouTube. It's free to subscribe, free to sign up for notifications. You get alerts on all of our videos when these guys drop knowledge. Jeff and Rod on last week, and now we have Luke and Matt back from Indianapolis, where you attended the NFL Combine. And we'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the offseason here, who the Saints may be looking at drafting, who they may be looking at in free agency, some of the salary cap moves that still need to be made. They've made a lot of progress on that front, but not fully there yet. And so we'll do that. Matt, you were in Indy an extra day from Luke last week. What
Really,
was your
an extra 2 days?
Yeah, extra 2 days. You were there through Saturday night.
He did the long haul.
Yeah.
What was your main takeaway from Indy?
I think we have some clarity now of what the Saints plan on doing in terms of, there was good news about Ryan Ramczyk, for instance, that I think calms the nerves on the offensive line a little bit. Marshawn Lattimore we can talk about, but it sounds like the Saints are very much open to trading him if they get the right offer. And then, the Combine is about the prospects themselves. And Luke wrote about that this week, but there were some guys who definitely jumped out and kind of fit the Saints profile. But it was also kind of fun to dip into the LSU realm and cover some of those guys. I really enjoyed Malik Neighbors at the podium. Let's put it that way. That guy was a character.
This is totally off topic, but I'm really high on Malik Neighbors. I think if you gave me Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors, I might take Neighbors as to have a better career.
I think I would too. And I think Marvin Harrison's awesome. I think he's like the complete package as a receiver, and he's going to be a very, very, very good receiver for a long time. But I think Neighbors has superstar potential, like in the conversation for the best 3 or 4 wideouts in the league in a couple years. Marvin Harrison might be that too, but I just think that the sky is so high for Neighbors, and especially if he gets in the right situation. I think we could see him day one have this giant impact, just like a lot of his fellow LSU alumni who we've seen come out in recent years, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, Odell Beckham. These guys have made an immediate impact at the NFL level, and I think Neighbors could be that guy. I think Brian Thomas could sneaky be a really, really good receiver too.
4.3.
He ran a 4.3, and I was talking to somebody about BT, and they were like, "Look, this guy did not focus on football until he got to LSU. He was a multi-sport athlete, a really, really big basketball prospect too. Once he started to finally focus on football, he took off, and he was amazing last year. I think there's still a lot more there for him, and he was awesome. So,
Saints kind of guy.
Brian Thomas is a Saints kind of guy. I think he's definitely should be in the conversation for them at 14, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I think that LSU has a lot of really fun guys in this class from an offensive perspective, which is kind of what you expect after the year they put up last year.
Yeah, we use that term a lot, Saints kind of guy, on this show, and we'll explain it and kind of go into that a little bit later. So that's a tease for later. Matt, first off, the new league year begins a week from today, actually, March 13th, next Wednesday. Still some things the Saints need to do. What do you think is next? The most recent moves they've had, they restructured Cam Jordan's contract, saved, I think, $9 million and change against the cap, and then release Marcus May, which is not going to help with the cap, but just continuing to tinker that roster.
Yeah, I think I looked on over the cap. I believe there's $17 million over. I saw $9 million elsewhere on, I think ESPN's projections had them at $9 million. But the main dominoes for them right now are what contracts do they want to touch. remaining. Like there's still Ryan Ramczyk's deal. Maybe you can get away with not touching that this year, depending on how things go. Alvin Kamara is another one that they could or couldn't touch. It's just really how do they get to that $255 million number that they're going to get there. It's just a matter of what steps they want to do and then how much space that they want to create for free agency, because I think that was another takeaway from the Combine. It doesn't sound like, they went star hunting last year by acquiring Derek Carr. They're not going to be as aggressive in free agency. They might stick to those kind of mid-tier deals and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I don't think like Chris Jones is an option to Neil Hunter, but maybe the next tier down, if the Saints do create some space, I mean, they could see some guys come in.
I mean, and that's kind of their MO. It's always funny, like this time of year where everybody's like the cap and the Saints and blah blah blah, and they're putting themselves in this position where they can't sign anybody, and then last year they led the NFL in free agent spending. I mean, they can do it if they want to. It's just a matter of whether they think it's a good idea to do it. If they want to touch Ryan Ramczyk's contract, considering his uncertain future, if they want to touch Alvin Kamara's contract, when he already has $25+ million, he's counting $25+ million on the books for next year. They can do it, and they can get there if they want to go after somebody, if they think he's going to be the difference maker to push him over the top. But the reality is that they'll probably do what they always do, which is target those mid-level free agents, guys who are making, at most $8-9 million a year. Which they got Tyrann Mathieu for about that much. They signed Emmanuel Sanders a couple years ago to a 2-year, $24 million deal. They signed Jared Cook a few years ago to, I think, $8 million per.
Marcus May,
right around 7.5, I think, for him. So that's typically what they do. And they've gotten some good players out of it. They don't always hit, but they're usually contributing level players. It's I think the thing is, this year they have a lot more gaps to fill than they have in the past. And I think that was the case going into last year, which is why we saw them spend on 2 defensive tackles last year and spend big on a quarterback. The holes are kind of popping up a little bit more on these teams than we've seen in the past.
And that's kind of what happens with this salary cap kicking the can down the road thing. It's not that they can't do it. They could continue to do it in perpetuity. I mean, because the cap's always going to increase. We talk about this. They can. The question is, if Ryan Ramczyk doesn't have a future, if Alvin Kamara is going to be a 30-something-year-old running back, should you? Maybe you just have to take your medicine for a couple of years and get those numbers more under control.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen teams in this very division take their medicine and still be able to compete in the same time. I mean, Tampa Bay was an example of that, but it doesn't sound like the Saints want to do that right now. They believe that they can still maximize this roster by going this route. And some of the deals that they've done, like the Derek Carr thing, that they had to restructure that basically. I mean, they built that into the contract. So I think they've always accounted for this. It's just, where this kind of hurts the Saints, I think, is they don't have a lot of top-level draft picks this year. They have 2, what is it, 2 in the top 40? Is that, or no?
2 in the top 50. I think the other one's 45.
45, yeah. 14 and 45. Yeah.
And so, you are going to get those comp picks probably in the 5th round, but there's just not a lot of ammo to build out the rest of your roster, which then you would look toward free agency. But I just don't know. I still think they can fill the margins and be competitive, but you're kind of looking at, in the grand scheme of things, kind of where they've been the last 2 years, and I guess that's where they want to be for now.
This would be a great year to trade down.
Yes.
Right. I was just about to bring that up, but they haven't done that in years.
2007, I want to say.
Few years ago.
More than 15 years, more than 15 draft classes since they traded back. And that was like in the mid rounds they traded back. They haven't traded out of the first round in a long time. But I think the way this top 10 is going to fall, I think a lot of us see it coming, where there's going to be the run on quarterbacks, there's going to be the run on receivers. There might be 3 receivers taken in the top 10. Might be 4 quarterbacks taken in the top 10. That leaves 3 spots for all the other positions. That's going to push a really good player who a lot of people were not expecting to be there back in the Saints range. And even if you're talking about trading back 4 or 5 spots and picking up a 3rd rounder, I think I would do that. Just considering the dearth of young impact players on this roster right now, cheap players.
Yeah.
They need as many of those as they can get.
I think the only risk with that is, because the Saints are at 14, that's really like the run where, I think one of the tackles will still be in play, one of the pass rushers. Like if you move back even 3 or 4 spots, then you have teams like, it feels like Indy's always looking for a pass rusher there right behind New Orleans. So I think it's smart. Like I would actually be maybe like if we're talking about trading back, maybe that second round pick, try and recuperate some assets later. But I think that the Saints are actually in a really nice spot at 14. But it just depends on what the offers are and all that and who's there.
Well, and their mindset has always been that they look at the players they like and they zero in on them, they lock in on them, and they either go get them, or they're like, okay, a couple of them are there for us to get it where we're at. But they never want to. Their idea is when you trade back, you're guaranteeing yourself a lesser player.
Well,
Right.
So
should I bring up the Washington point this early in the show, or should I save it for later?
Might as well, man. It's out there now.
Like the Commanders got themselves in trouble, I think, by trading back a few times, and you look at even the Chris Olave deal that the Saints did with the Commanders. They traded back for Jahan Dotson. Now, I'm not giving up on Jahan Dotson, but they recuperated some players, but it feels like they always kind of passed over that high level talent, and when you do that enough times, then you get in trouble with your roster. So I understand the appeal of trading back, but at the same time, they by trading back, they missed out on Kyle Hamilton, who went to the Ravens a few picks later. That's a guy that they could have used. You get yourself in trouble a little bit, even though trading back in theory is a really nice deal.
Right. And look, they're going through this with a much higher level understanding of these players. Yet they devote months of their lives scouting these guys and learning everything about them. It's an inexact science. Not all these guys are going to pan out, but they what I think the word Jeff Ireland used about the scouting process is he wants conviction on a player. So unless you have conviction about 7 players, and one of them is going to be there, you stick with your guns and take the guy you like. Even though historically you look back in the draft and there's superstars drafted in the back of the first round every year. It happens. It happens every year, but those are much rarer than having conviction about a guy and sticking with him and taking him at the spot.
And the other, I guess, argument in favor of picking up a couple of later picks, day 2 picks, day 3 picks, the Saints have had a lot of success with some of those guys. I mean, they've arguably in the last couple of years had more success in the 4th, 5th, 6th round than they have in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, but I think, and this is part of what I'm a little bit interested in seeing this year is, I think they've taken a lot of home run swings at those players in the first round because their roster was so good. They could afford to take a gamble on traits, and they saw the really, really, really high ceiling on some of these guys. They're like, okay, well, if we hit on that guy, we're gonna have an all-pro. It just that part hasn't worked out, and the gambling on traits hasn't worked out in the first round. And I don't think they do that nearly as much with those 2nd, 3rd, 4th round picks as they have in that top round, where you're getting guys who are freak athletes. And I think also some of these guys, I've always had this theory that when you're a team like the Saints and you're drafting guys who are super big and super athletic, and then with guys like Marcus Davenport and Peyton Turner, you ask them to put on weight at the pro level to be kind of fit exactly what you want them to be. I think sometimes that can lead to injuries.
Sure,
guys who are really, really big and don't move like guys who are that big. You see it a lot of that, especially like the NBA. Big guys who move like small guys get hurt sometimes. It's happened with a lot of these Saints picks, whether it's Teron Armstead or Marcus Davenport or Peyton Turner. Trevor Penning has dealt with injuries. He's an unusual athlete for a player his size. I think it's part of the gamble with players like that.
And this is why we'll spend so much time over the next 7 weeks talking about the draft. Why it's so popular, because number one, you're selling hope because you could get the next great star, and number 2, it's just so unpredictable. I mean, we don't know, if Joe Alt is, and we can use this to transition into our discussion about Saints kind of guys, but if Joe Alt from Notre Dame is still on the board at 14, all of a sudden that's a different discussion than trading back if the top 2 tackles are gone.
Correct.
Because you can sit there and say, this guy, and again, you can never assume health. I don't care what studies you have, what diagnostics you have. You can never assume health. But if he stays healthy, he could be a Pro Bowl starter for many years in the NFL. You got to take that guy at 14. You need that guy.
Right.
But if he's not, and now you're looking at less sure things or guys lower down on your board, then maybe you do want an extra third rounder or fourth rounder or something like that. So, okay, you're watching the Saints Insider podcast or listening to it. Subscribe to the channel, leave us a review, hit the thumbs up button. We appreciate all of that. Saints kind of guys, Luke. You wrote up a post after watching the combine in Indianapolis last week. Describe quickly for us what a Saints kind of guy is under Mickey Loomis.
Okay, well, I think there's a lot of criteria that kind of fall into this. But if you're looking at kind of, especially since Jeff Ireland got here in 2016, the Saints kind of guy is very big and kind of doesn't really matter what the position is. When you're talking about offensive linemen, you're talking about guys who are like 6'5", 6'6", tackles like around 320 pounds. You're talking about defensive ends like 6'4", 6'5", 260 pounds. And then you add in like elite high-level athletic traits. Something like, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but something like 80% of their draft picks in the last 3 years specifically, but really historically, fall like above a 9 on the relative athletic score. This metric put out by Kentley Platt, who's a very useful guy to follow if you're into the draft. But basically, it measures the player's athleticism on a 0 to 10 scale, 10 being the highest, relative to their size and their position. So basically, every Saints draft pick has been, off the charts, like way, way, way up there. They don't draft guys who are okay athletes or who don't kind of fit that athletic profile. That's why, like, last year when Brian Branch fell and the Saints kind of had a need at safety, we all thought, I was like, there's no way they're going to pick him because he's small and he had like a 6-something score on this thing. And they passed over him. Even though he turned out to be a really good player, Antoine Winfield, the same type of player, small, didn't have the great athletic profile. But like the Saints pick a lot of these guys. And then when you add in other factors like leadership traits, were they a team captain, production at the college level, something like 17 out of their last 19 draft picks were all conference players.
Yeah, and this is not just what the Saints say. These are not just platitudes. I mean, we've looked back at what Mickey Loomis has been here almost 20 years. Now he's been here more than 20 years. This is who he drafts. I mean, these are the guys that he drafts almost every time. So we can look at these characteristics, come up with Saints kind of guys. Matt, for purposes of this discussion, fair to say that offensive lineman, defensive lineman, or wide receiver, we'll say pass catcher, are the three areas the Saints are overwhelmingly likely to look at in that first round.
Yeah, I would say so. I would put maybe pass catcher a distant third. Maybe Brock Bowers is interesting. Tight end, you go that way rather than the receivers. Now, if one of those receivers we mentioned earlier falls, then I think that's a no-brainer. But for now, like when we were talking about the upside of number 14, I think you're more likely to find that in the premium positions, tackle, defensive end. And there are some guys in this draft that I think are really interesting players. Jared Verse kind of fits that Saints profile of, he's 6'4". I think he weighed at 254. He normally plays around 260. So, he's maybe the top pass rusher in this draft. And then the tackles, there's really 4 of them right now, maybe 5 with Amarius Mims. Yeah. Amarius Mims, sorry. He's the type of guy that I think had a really good combine and kind of worked his way up there. I was looking at mock drafts after the combine, and the Ringer had him at 5, which, that's talk about a guy's stock going up. And because of that, then maybe one of the other tackles falls, and the Saints get one of those, maybe a Joel Alt, or I think that Ringer mock draft I looked at had Fashanu from
Olu Fashanu.
Yeah, from Penn State. And wow, that'd be a great pick, I think.
Okay, so let's start with the offensive lineman, and we have 3 names that you highlighted, and there's more than this, but Amarius Mims, Joe Alt, and J.C. Latham from Alabama is the other one, who sort of, they have the size, they have the athletic pedigree. In short, they are Saints kind of guys at offensive line.
Yeah. I think the only knock on those 3 would come with Mims because he only had like 8 college starts, and he dealt with injury, which like is probably scaring Saints fans hearing that, right? Guy doesn't have a lot of playing experience, and is he's also a guy who's coming off injury. But like
Another raw tackle? You're telling me?
well, I wouldn't go so far as saying he's raw. I mean, he started at the University of Georgia, and that's I think the reason that he had only 8 college starts is because they pumped out first round picks at offensive tackle for a while. He played a lot of football. He just didn't get the starting reps. But like he's somebody. I mean, we were talking about him before the combine even started. You don't find very many 6'7", 340-pound guys who are running almost a 5 flat 40, right? And it wasn't just that; it was his other numbers too. Talking about like explosive short range movement. I think he's a very interesting candidate. He's just the one that comes with probably the most questions because he hasn't played a lot. Joe Alt, I mean, he's been a starter, I think, his whole time at Notre Dame. He checks every single box. He's big. He's athletic. Played a lot. I'm sure if I look back at his bio, he's a team captain at Notre Dame. They love that stuff. Don't think he's going to be there, but like if you're talking about a team like the Saints who likes to trade up, I mean, if he's falling into that 10, 11, 12 range, it wouldn't be a surprise to see them make a move for him. And then, Olu Fashanu, I didn't mention in that list, but, he's a guy who I think in his last 2 years at Penn State, he didn't give up a sack, something like 700 pass blocking reps. I think that's a position that, and Matt, you wrote about this, is there's a lot of guys that you really like. And some of the guys who I didn't even put on the list, maybe their scouting's changed a little bit with Clint Kubiak, and you talk like somebody about what was his name, Talise Fuaga.
Oh yeah, from Morgan State.
Yeah, who's another guy who's highly regarded, who's probably going to be a top 20 pick, but who's maybe a little bit on the shorter, lighter side than they typically like to go with at tackle, but. Maybe that fits more in what Clint Kubiak is looking at. I just think that there's so many possibilities with this. And there's a lot of tackle prospects that you could really talk yourself into, and so many that I think that could even be a realistic possibility for pick 45.
Yeah, it's funny going back at when I wrote that tackle article, I went and pulled up the scouting reports for Trevor Penning just to see what was being said, and at the time it was a lot of people thought he'd be that day one starter, and so I think it brings a level of caution when reading some of these scouting reports. Not that they're all wrong, but you've got to focus, I think, on not what a guy can't do, because I think you fall into a trap of maybe avoiding some great players in that case. But like with Penning, it was, how is that aggression going to translate to the next level? I think for a guy like J.C. Latham, if you read and listen to people who know much more than I about this, but they say his eyes, like the pre-snap recognition of he handled twists and stunts just okay, has like kind of average recognition apparently. How does that translate to? And then the thing with Latham specifically too is he played on the right side, and with Ramczyk being okay now, are you going to draft a right tackle and move him over to left? Now he says he wants to do that and would love an opportunity on the left side, but I think that's something to consider with a guy like that as well.
Yep.
All right. So
and Latham also didn't test at the combine. He had a lingering ankle injury, so the only thing he did was measure in there. He was the only guy I put on that list who didn't have an athletic score, but everything you read about him and everything says he's a superior athlete. So I just assume that he'd be kind of in the target area, but he's got everything else. He's got like a 84-inch wingspan, which is insane. It's 7 feet. He's got like a Victor Wembanyama wingspan.
Yeah, imagine trying to get past that as a defensive end. So offensive tackle, I think, is like the chalk pick for the Saints, right? Like it's the most obvious need. Ryan Ramczyk's health uncertainty, Andres Pete's a free agent, Trevor Penning struggles. Like it's the chalk pick. But if they don't go offensive tackle, then edge rusher comes into it, and they are getting Peyton Turner can't stay healthy. Cam Jordan not getting any younger.
He's gonna be 35.
Yeah, not becoming more. If he was not very effective as a pass rusher this last year. So that's probably next on the list. And the Saints kind of guys you highlighted at defensive line are Jared Verse and Dallas Turner, first and foremost. Jared Verse, Florida State, Dallas Turner, Alabama. You also had Leatu Latu of UCLA on the list. and there was somebody else.
Chop Robinson.
Yeah.
I put him and Dallas Turner in the same kind of category.
Yeah, so these are the guys the types of guys that if the Saints go that direction or the offensive tackles aren't there, maybe they trade back. These are the types of guys they would look for.
Yeah, and I think this is where the discussion gets really interesting because they've stuck so rigidly to that defensive end prototype. They've only drafted one kind of guy. It's made it really, like last year we all thought they needed another defensive end, and I'm like, who's going to be there in the second round? Isaiah Foskey, obvious pick. Like, productive in college, 6'4", 260, team captain, like, yeah. Box. But like all of these high picks they've had lately have not panned out. Marcus Davenport injured, Peyton Turner injured, Foskey didn't get on the field, and when he did, he didn't make an impact. So I think, and you know, we saw him put Zach Bond in there at the end of the year as a situational edge rusher and have some success. And we've heard Dennis Allen say they need to get more athletic on the outside. So like I think they're willing to reevaluate exactly what their needs are there. If this were any other year in the last 8 years, I would have been like, they're taking Jared Verse if he's there. But like I'm not so convinced now. I think if Dallas Turner is there, and I'm not sure he will be after kind of putting on a show at the combine, but like he doesn't fit their usual prototypes. He measured in under 6'3". He was 242 pounds. Those are both lower than what they typically go for there. But he is a freak athlete, and he put up huge numbers at Alabama. And that he would be like the ideal player if that's what you're going to transition into. You're getting more of that kind of sub-rush type of player, somebody who's going to add some immediate juice to that pass rush on the outside. Because it's not like they're drafting like a 225-pound outside linebacker who's going to stand up and rush sometimes. He's still solidly built, but it's just like a little bit below their prototype. I think he's like a very, very interesting case there, if that's an area they want to add to. And the kind of same thing goes for Chop Robinson, who I think would still be a little bit high for me.
Yeah.
Because he didn't have like the monster production at Penn State. But like a lot of people are kind of comparing him like Micah Parsons light. And I think that should be intriguing.
You'd take that.
Yeah. And I mean, he put up, he's another guy who put up crazy numbers at the combine. You're talking about like edge rushers running in like the 4.4s. That's not something they've ever had here. So I think it's something to consider.
I want to workshop a take that I've been thinking about.
Let's go.
here.
Please do.
I love it.
So Jared Verse, I think, still formulating it, but I think he's a good hybrid of, on paper, he's what the Saints want or have always wanted. And then I think there's some athleticism there that maybe is that kind of new blend, because he talked a lot about how he put on weight during that COVID year. He used to weigh, I guess coming out of high school, he was like 6'3", 200 pounds. So I wonder, being smaller relative, but still smaller at that level going into college, if he has some experience as that speedier edge rusher, which now that he's played up to size, put on that weight, I wonder if there's that athleticism still there that maybe if you look at, Peyton Turner, Marcus Davenport, like maybe he's a little bit more pro-ready than, like, I think maybe he's a happy medium of kind of what they're looking for and what they could evolve into.
I like it.
Yeah.
Jared Verse becoming the favorite on stage here.
When he's the pick at number 14, I want you to explore that story.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I thought about it as I was writing it the other day, but I was like, oh, I really should have followed up on this, so I didn't put it in the story at all, but it's been lingering.
Yeah, I think, like I said, offensive line is the chalk pick. But, Luke, you and I were talking before the show. There were times last year this defense was statistically not any better than the offense, in some cases worse. And it's not getting any younger. And so I think even though the Saints have addressed defensive line several times early in these last few drafts, it's a distinct possibility they go there again.
I mean, yeah, it absolutely is. And look, as good as their pass defense was last year, I think that's always the thing that helps that out the most is getting after the quarterback. It was a miracle that they held up as well as they did when they were getting like no pressures. And that's really when you look at when this Saints defense was at its best, when you're talking about that run of like 4 years, they were all like top 5 every year. They were stopping the run and they were getting after the passer every single year. They were forcing these teams in these 3rd and long situations, and then they were finishing the year with 50, 55, 52 sacks, right? Top 5 in both categories. And that is when you get like the elite defensive play. You stop the run, you force teams in the disadvantageous situations, and then you let your pass rush feast. And last year, they didn't stop the run very well, and then they also couldn't get after the quarterback. And I think that's why you saw them finish as like a kind of a mediocre team, even though their offense, as much hand wringing as we did over the offense last year, and it wasn't good enough, it's to be sure, they still finished the year with a top 10 scoring offense.
I think it would have been good enough if you had paired it with a top 5 defense again.
That's correct. And that's probably what they were banking on going into the year. But I just don't think that you can, like, this defense is regressing. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think you need to add some young dudes to that mix to get it kind of back to where it needs to be. Because I don't think this is Dennis Allen's defensive play calling is getting worse. I just think the execution on the field has not been as good.
Yeah.
I wonder if they do pick a pass rusher, and this is getting way down the line of what does that mean, like, in terms of, because the guy we haven't mentioned is Carl Granderson. I think his spot is secured. How do they incorporate a new pass rusher in there with guys like Foskey, Turner? Like, could they be on the bubble come training camp, based on that? If they draft a pass rusher in the first round, those guys are, I think, on the clock to at least produce something right away and secure their spot, because there's going to be a lot of mouths to feed. Even if Cam Jordan moves into kind of a rotational pass rusher role, I think you'd still really like him on the field a lot just because of his run defense and the stuff he's still kind of able to do.
Well, and that's the thing, because Cam is still such a really good run defender. I think that's an area where if you use one of your top picks on a defensive end, you could rotate him in and maybe have him play like 35-40% of the snaps, but really use those snaps to get after the passer. And they've used those like NASCAR fronts a lot in the last couple of years, where they have 3, sometimes 4 defensive ends on the field. And you're pushing guys like Cam or Tano Passanio or somebody like that to the inside and letting them rush on a guard. I think we could see a lot of that if they draft a pass rusher with the 14th pick. I think they're going to add to it regardless.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like a similar thing with Penning. You can't go into the season just like counting on Peyton Turner and Isaiah Foskey to be better players than they have been. Foskey, you can expect some growth out of him. He's only a second-year player. They're not giving up on him by any stretch, but Peyton Turner's been hurt every year of his career. You can't.
At some point,
I don't know if I'd go so far as saying he'd be on the bubble, but
Right.
I think it's a fair point. But I don't think I would go that far. But I think I don't think you can just like say like, well, this is the year he's going to be healthy and contributing.
It certainly would be a make or break year, I think, for some of those guys.
Yes.
At the very least.
Yes.
So, all right. If the Saints do not go on the line, offensive or defensive line, the third option we mentioned was wide receivers. Your Saints kind of guys at wide receiver. One is Roma Dunze of Washington, who I think probably doesn't fall to 14, but you never know the way these things go.
Right. He's one of those guys who like I was considering before the combine at that spot, and then after the combine, I'm thinking there's no way he gets there.
Yeah.
How do you feel about his plain answer? Did you hear that question about?
No, you got to fill us in on this.
Okay, so guys were asked unconventional questions and said, "Could you take over a flight midway if need be, in case of emergency?" And he said, "No, going down. All souls perished."
Hey,
he was honest.
points for
so-
honesty.
Yeah, I appreciate the honesty.
The other two guys were an LSU guy that you mentioned, Brian Thomas, and then the other one who terrorized LSU, Keon Coleman of Florida State in that season opener this year. A couple of other just uber athletic guys.
Yeah, and Keon Coleman to me I think would be more of a like if he falls to the second round kind of guy.
Or they trade back.
I don't think I would take him at number 14.
I think 14 is pretty high for Thomas too, if I'm being honest. But
14
just based on where I see him anyway.
Yeah, I think 14 could kind of be like that. That would be the area where he starts being a realistic option for teams,
Sure.
in my opinion. Like 14 to 24, something like that range.
Yeah.
It just depends on whether they really, really like him and think he could
sure.
be a superstar. But yeah, I think the thing that stood out about the receivers, there's like last year's class was filled with a bunch of guys like what's the kid who went to Baltimore?
Zay Flowers.
Zay
Shorter,
Flowers.
not.
Yeah, a lot of like slot guys,
Yeah.
a lot of 5'9", 5'10", 180-pound speed burners. This year's class lines up a lot better for the Saints just in terms of what they are looking for, what could function in this Clint Kubiak offense. There's going to be a big hole in this roster whenever they release Michael Thomas, which is we're pretty much considering that a certainty at this point, right? Maybe by the time the show's out, he might not even
That's
be
a
on the
when,
roster.
not an if. Yeah.
There's a hole in this roster for a big-bodied possession receiver, and I think there's also a hole in this roster for a guy who's going to make some hay after the catch. So when you're looking at a lot of these guys, there was so many receivers. I didn't even write down everybody I noted in my notebook. There's so many receivers in this class who kind of potentially fit that mold where you're talking about like 6 feet and up, 195, 200 pounds and up, who can move. I think Brian Thomas, Rome Odunze, I think is just going to be a stud no matter where he goes. I think that he doesn't matter what system he's in. He's really, really good. He fits everything. Don't think he's going to be there. But like Brian Thomas, 6'3", I think 206, something like that, 210 at the combine, running a 4.33. Like that'll fit. And then Keon Coleman was a really interesting one because he's big body guy, wide catch radius, and he reminds me a lot of Michael Thomas, just in that like he could fall because his 40 time was not very good. I think he ran like a 4.6, which is right around Mike Thomas was like a 4.5 something.
Yeah, for that spot, you don't need that kind of speed.
Right. They've got plenty of speed on this roster as is at wide receiver. And Shaheed and Olave both are sub 4.4 guys. But I think what they don't have is the guy who's going to do the dirty work. And Coleman does a lot of that. And then, I think Next Gen Stats had a really, really interesting thing where they use the player tracking with the GPS and everything like that. And there might not be GPS. I think I've had somebody from Next Gen Stats say, well, actually, something else. Regardless, Keon Coleman posted the fastest miles per hour out of any wide receiver in the last 2 years during the gauntlet drill, like 20-point-something miles per hour during that thing. It's not like the guy is a slow mover, and a lot of the routes that he ran, like he was up at like kind of the top of his group in terms of like how fast he's actually running the routes. So maybe he doesn't have like the long speed.
Straight line speed only comes in to play in football so much. I mean,
that's right. Yeah. So I think that like I'm gonna kind of gloss over the 40 time and trust that he's just been a super productive receiver both at Michigan State and Florida State, and he fits like the athletic profile of what the Saints are looking for. But even if they don't go with a receiver at 14 or 45, I just think that, and this has been true of a lot of receiving classes in the last couple of years. There's like a lot of guys. Like there might be like 15 receivers taken in the first 3 rounds of this draft. It's just there's a lot of guys who are big and can move and were productive college players. Devontae Walker from North Carolina, Xavier Legette from South Carolina. I mean, the list just kind of goes on and on.
Yeah, what's interesting about receiver, too, is for a long time that was the position that was supposed to be the hardest to come into the NFL right away and translate. But you've seen, I kind of think starting with that Odell Beckham draft, like ever really since then, guys have just come in year after year and been day one impactful guys. And so, if you're thinking about the Saints and you need an immediate impact player, well, I don't think a receiver as, it's not the risk it used to be. And frankly, we saw it with Chris Olave a few years ago. He came in and was fantastic. And, they've hit on some rookie receivers here.
The other option at 14, and we'll just lump him in with pass catchers. You mentioned him at the top, is Brock Bowers. And that seems, I think we all went into last year thinking Juwan Johnson was on the rise, and he had an up and down year, probably lowered his expectations. I don't know that it's exactly a need, but he's also a guy, and I saw him, I think CBS Sports had a mock draft just this morning that had Brock Bowers falling to the Saints at 14. If he falls that far, I think you have to consider him.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be a terrible pick. It kind of worries, like, it just feels like the tight ends that have gone high in the draft necessarily haven't panned out with at least those teams, like Kyle Pitts, maybe not so in Atlanta, at least maybe needs a change of scenery, who knows. TJ Hawkinson, I think, is a really good football player who destroyed the Saints, but for Minnesota, not for Detroit. I think I'd rather positional value pick somewhere like someone else and then worry about that spot later.
Yeah.
But he's really good, so maybe I'm
yeah. I think Bowers to me falls into the category of like, holy smokes, guys like this don't really come along that often at this position.
But we heard that about Pitts too.
It's true. It's true. But like I think the production is different for Bowers than it was for those guys. I mean, he was like, I think he was like a 17-year-old freshman at Georgia. I might be getting that completely wrong, but he was just a high level contributor from like day one, play one, and when you're talking about what the Saints offense needs, we're talking about a guy who's going to move the chains, right? They don't necessarily need a guy like Brian Thomas because of his downfield speed. They need somebody who's going to be a dependable outlet, much like Mike Thomas was for Drew Brees all those years. So like, I wouldn't hate it. I mean, I'm with you on the putting an emphasis on premium positions, but like, I also see what George Kittle does in this San Francisco offense, and I'm like, I mean, it'd be really great to have the freaky tight end.
Brock Bowers would have been such a perfect pick for the Saints 3 or 4 years ago when they needed one more piece to kind of finish things off. I just don't know. They got so many holes now.
They do, but like one of those holes is a pass catcher.
Yeah, and
it is somebody who could complement the skill sets they already have in place with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and A.T. Perry. So I mean, I would not hate the pick. I think that he could do a lot of really, really great things in this offense, and would provide something they don't already currently have. Even though I still think Juwan Johnson is a good football player. He just didn't turn out to hit the like sky high stuff that a lot of us were kind of thinking he might last year.
Okay, so that's our discussion of the Saints kind of guys. We do want you, we talked offensive linemen, defensive linemen, pass catchers. We do want you to chime in, put a poll up on the YouTube page. So if you're not watching on YouTube, go over there, Saints on NOLA.com YouTube page, subscribe while you're at it, and let us know what position you would pick if you were the Saints GM. We have offensive line, defensive line, pass catcher. We also have other. So for those of you still stuck on the Saints taking a quarterback at 14, you can choose other. I don't think that's very likely.
Not happening.
Yeah, but you can have your say. So check that out on the saintsonnnola.com YouTube channel. And then I want to wrap things up with just a kind of circle back to the league year beginning, guys, next week. What non-Saints story are you paying attention to in free agency over the next week or two?
I want to know if the Falcons are going to make a move for a quarterback.
That's exactly where I was going with this.
Yeah. I mean,
sounds like Kirk Cousins.
Sounds like Kirk Cousins is going to be available, and that would seem to be a pretty good marriage between player and available talent on the offense. I still think there's a possibility that Justin Fields could be on the move next week, and he might be an option in Atlanta. If they don't make a move for either of those two, I think we could see Atlanta get very aggressive in the draft and try to move up to one of those top 3 picks, give up an absolute haul to move up from 8 to 2 or 3 or whatever, and draft either Drake May or Jaden Daniels, because I think both of us kind of assume that Caleb Williams is going to be guy number 1.
Jaden Daniels in a Falcons uniform it would
drive people absolutely insane.
Louisiana sports fans' nightmares.
Well, especially considering the Saints' struggles like defending mobile quarterbacks.
Yes.
Like, can you just imagine like if he puts up 150 rushing yards against them next year? People will be going insane.
Yeah, people will go crazy. So that's the obvious one. I mean, I think Matt, the Falcons are going to really change the look of the NFC South with whoever is it going to be another rookie quarterback? Are you going to have 2 teams trying to kind of groom these high pick quarterbacks, top with Bryce Young in Carolina and now with a top 5 pick in Atlanta? Or will it be a Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields veteran situation who comes in and kind of does what the Saints did and bring in a veteran who's a little bit older but has had some success in his career? So that's the big one. Anything else you're looking at?
Sticking to Fields, I'm really curious on when that happens and where. I think the consensus coming from the combine is maybe his market isn't as hot as maybe we thought. Like, I'm trying to pick the team. Atlanta, I don't necessarily really make sense. If Arthur Smith was still there, I would have said, yeah, that's a a really good marriage, but you know, you turned over that coaching staff. Like Kirk Cousins is perfect for that offense. He's played in it in Minnesota and in Washington. But like, does he go to the Raiders? Well, they have Luke Getsy. Is Luke Getsy signing up for Justin Fields again? Like,
is Justin Fields signing up for Luke? Well,
yes,
he may not have a choice, but
right, no, but like, it's just, what are they going to do? And the timing of it, I think, is interesting too, because Caleb Williams didn't do medical at the combine, and so, like, are they going to trade Justin Fields before getting the medical on Caleb Williams? Like, is he going to Chicago anytime soon to do that? Like, I just am curious the timeline with that. And then the other guy we haven't mentioned, I just am curious because I don't know where the heck his career is at this point, is Russell Wilson. I mean, just, I can't believe Denver, like, that didn't pan out the way that, I thought that was a home run trade when they made it a few years ago, and I know he hasn't played well since, but just curious what he does at this stage of his career.
Russell Wilson seems like a Pittsburgh Steeler to me. Rod's not here.
Falcons country, let's rise.
Yeah.
Falcons country, let's fly.
How about Justin Fields to Denver? Do they have the cap space for that? I don't.
You guys know him better than, but is Justin Fields a Sean Payton type of guy? Or Sean Payton?
I think Sean
Payton's
Payton's
had Drew
been,
Brees his whole-
I think he's been intrigued by the idea of a mobile quarterback, though. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised at that. I think the Steelers are another one that I'm looking out for with Justin Fields.
Yeah. Oh, that would make sense for.
Yeah.
But then he'd have to compete with Pickett, and I mean, that's fine.
Well,
I think
and,
Justin Fields is a
Mason
better
Rudolph.
quarterback.
Yeah.
Right.
very, very difficult competition there. All right. Let's say
to
we
watch.
reconvene in a week. Next Wednesday, we'll be back with the Saints Insider. That'll be March 13th. That is the start of the league year. May have some deals trickling in that day, or even, sometimes you get rumors beforehand and those sorts of things, or trades.
Yeah, the negotiating window opens on Monday.
Yeah,
So,
so
they'll be agreed to terms for 2 days.
Plenty to talk about next Wednesday. For Norman Bell, our producer, he's Matthew Parrish and Luke Johnson. I'm Zach Ewing, and this has been the Saints Insider. Thanks for watching.